Welcome to the Pacific, Honourable Fiame Naomi Mata'afa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation to have an interview.
Now, reflecting now, what achievement are you most proud of during your term as the first female Prime Minister of Samoa?
Well, you'll probably appreciate that our coming into government was fairly contentious. We had a period of close to 3 months after the general election before we could come in as a new government. And so ultimately, it was the court settlement, and particularly on the issue of whether the swearing in of our party members under the tent was legal. So I think once that issue was determined, all the court cases had been settled with regards to the numbers in the House. Then HRPP then saw that it was the right thing to do. I mean, it was the right thing to do long before, but as politics go, they will hang in there as much as possible. So it was a very contentious period. I think the whole term has been fairly contentious, not only with the opposition, but also latterly at the beginning of this year with the split of the political party. But to answer your question, I think the achievement of what the party has been able to do in relatively short period, 4 years. We came into government post-COVID, where the rest of the world, including Samoa, were experiencing economic downtrends. We came in at a minus 3% of the economy, and within 3 years, we had brought it up to 5%, then 8%, and now very close to 10%. So I think fiscal management is always a fundamental element of the work of government. If you can't sort of bring your economy around, it's difficult to not only perform the services, but also the development agenda of the country. I think for me personally, the review and the amendments of the Constitution and the legislation for the Lands and Titles Court that had led me to resign from the HRPP in the previous government, we were able to amend those laws, which was really to ensure the integrity of the court or the judicial sector was in place. And because, fundamentally I felt that that set of bills undermined the constitutional and rule base of the government, hence my leaving. So we've corrected that, and I feel that, as a legislator, I could not have walked away from that situation, hence my leaving the party and making an issue of it in the last election, which I think was a significant issue in terms of the country making its decisions. So perhaps those two things.
Political instability, including the use of no confidence motions, to challenge elected leaders, is a big issue, not only in Samoa, but across the Pacific. If re-elected, do you have any legislative changes you would like to make in ensuring or improve the stability of elected governments?
Well, Samoa has been quite fortunate in that we haven't had that experience previously. I think that the particular circumstance here, it was not so much that there was or were motions of no confidence, it's just that there were two in a row. I think, that's, how often do you seek out confidence? So I think if there's any legislative consideration, it's about timing and what would be an appropriate period, especially if you've already had one motion of confidence, just to ensure that there is stability, that there is a period of time. And I know that other governments have addressed those issues with time frames and so forth. So I think it's possibly something worth considering, but I also think the circumstances here were quite particular, and especially that there was no majority in the House. And I had made that quite clear when the first motion was put forward by HRPP, that, because the opposition had 18, Lauli and the other side of the FAST party had 20, and we had 15. So in the first motion, as you know, put forward by the opposition, Lauli voted with the cabinet, with the government. And then in the second motion, they changed sides, and Lauli put forward the motion and HRPP sided with the government.
Lava. Now, coming to misinformation around politics, it's a big issue in Samoa. Leaving voters confused about what to believe, really. Facts, misinformation being spread on social media. What would you do if re-elected to counter this? Have you thought of any changes to make to ensure that this does not happen again?
Well, I think, social media has become quite a significant factor in what might lead, to confusion in the public. But I think, first of all, to speak truthfully about issues, and if there is misinformation, to correct it. I'm not sure that one can legislate against misinformation. If there's a kinder word for it, sometimes it's called the spin. But I think it's really important, and this is one of the points that we're making in terms of our taking our manifesto out to the public, is to say, with clarity what it is that we're putting forward. So it's speaking to the issues, identifying perhaps priorities, in particular examples of, especially if they're new initiatives. But I think the point we're also trying to make is that this party was formed essentially because FAST broke up. But we have been the government of the last 4 years. And we're a government that came through, what I earlier spoke to. We've been able to bring the economy forward. All the indicators, except for the differences, between the political people, but all the indicators in terms of, what is required to continue governance, right? To provide service, to offer protections through the laws, and etc. We've managed to do that even as a minority government. I think we did make history in terms of the Samoan political scenario of having a minority government.
Hello. Do you feel you have experienced sexism as the first female prime minister? And also, and what message do you think that sends to citizens and also aspiring young leaders?
I'm sure that there are sexist attitudes, but I think it's very important to understand, Adele, the Samoan political context. You know, the basic criterion for members of parliament is that they hold matai titles. So it's a bit like, you know, having a club, right? So you're either in the club or out of the club. So we're all matais in the parliament. And if there's something that Samoan politicians stand on, it's their status as matais. So I would have to say, since I became a member of parliament, you know, I'm there as a Samoan matai. So I think um, it was in the second motion of no confidence where possibly the most sexist and blatant expression was made by the member from Whalearupo, who said perhaps if I was married, you know, I might have better counsel on how to conduct um, my leadership and so forth. But generally, no. Um, and I've always made a point in the context of the Samoan Parliament that we talk to each other as Samoan matais.
Malo lava. What do you see as the most pressing issues facing Samoa over the next political term?
Samoa's a small country. You know, resources are limited, including the most important one, which is the human resource. And, you know, there's significant loss of that resource, you know, due to migration, labor mobility, and the opportunities that people see to go overseas. And, you know, that's a great loss to any country, and especially for small countries. So, you know, I think for us to be, you know, viable, progressive, and moving forward, we do need to address the human resource issue. We have to look at policies that will make Samoans want to stay, and also policies that will make Samoans living away from Samoa to come back. So our approach with this current government, and we hope to carry it forward, as a small country, you know, government is not enough to carry, you know, the development agenda. Everyone needs to be on board. So a greater part of our work is essentially investment in the country, all sectors. You know, generally they might talk about, you know, the business sector and so forth. But we see broader, and I think especially the initiative of the 1 million tala grant to constituencies. And this is really to put the resources in the people's hands so that there is an earlier response to needs than just, you know, the usual rotation of government programs being rolled out from time to time. So that is perhaps the broad stroke approach and priority of our current government. And if we are returned, and we are seeing, you know, the positive impacts of that investment in the country and in different sectors.
I would like to raise some of the issues that many of our people have shared, and one of them in particular is the cost of living, which has risen sharply under your government. You know, this is their biggest concern. Now, why should they trust your party should return to manage this when you have been in power for 4 years and the prices are still rising?
Well, I think to be fair, Adele, I don't think Samoa is the only country that's experiencing cost of living rises. I'm sure in Australia, where you live, that would be the same song. And the causes, of course, is especially post-COVID. For small countries like Samoa, you know, and with the geographical placing of Pacific Islands, you know, the whole isolation, I think the most significant factor that has impacted costs is the costs of transport, of goods and services. I mean, the airfares around this region are just, astronomical. So, I think, of course, there are ways and means by which you can bring down the costs. But then, as I was saying, trying to manage the economy in the macro sense to enable the country to run, we've done that. But the investment, I think, in our people is then really to assist people to be more resilient, right, and are able to respond to rising costs and so forth. So I think there are many ways in which to address rising costs. Of course, duties and tariffs are always other ways and means of doing that. And in our manifesto, we're looking at dropping the VAT GST down to 12% from 15%. We're looking at taking away duties and tariffs on basic foods. And also, I mean, they're already, basic foods are already at low tariffs. But I think the main complaint is really about the frozen goods, especially the meats. Chicken seems to be the headliner. So, I mean, there are many ways to address that. But, on the other side of the scale, we're the first government that have addressed the issue of the minimum wage in a rational way. So we have now taken 2 steps to increase the minimum wage and have set in place processes where there is a review of that every 2 years. So for the public service, we've reviewed the salaries, and so it's really the other side of the equivalent, how people can better afford or be more resilient towards rising prices and so forth. Although we're moving into renewable energies, it is still at the development stage, and that's the costly stage. So in the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, that's a double banger. There's a cost to changing, but there's also the rising prices of oil. And I think, with the happenings in the Middle East, I don't think that situation is going to improve either.
For your party specifically, Samoa Uniting Party, everybody's curious about how will your party deliver these bold promises in the future should you be re-elected?
Bold? I thought we were quite temperate compared to Bridges to Savai'i from the other guys, and 500 per person, every single person in the country. I mean, the point I think that we're making is premised on the budget that failed, 1.2 million. So we're looking at the realities of, what's the economic parameters. So it's premised on that parameter. It's not a far-fetched parameter. So it's a pretty realistic. I wouldn't call it bold. I would call it realistic, but I think quite targeted in terms of where we want to put the investment from government. And you will note there the support to education has risen, dramatically. It's almost a 50% rise for health. And then, for the development of livelihoods and investing in communities. And for businesses, we've risen, I think in this proposal, the investment prior to this was at 15 million. We've now earmarked it for 50 million for private, for business development.
let's just go back to the electricity problem. Now, I understand similarly earlier this year we've faced a lot of electricity outages, and had major impact across, our society. Do you accept now that your government should have done more, quicker, or to prevent such widespread impact? And at the moment, are there any plans to ensure this will never happen again?
Well, first of all, in terms of responding quicker, I think we responded as quickly as we could, right? So let's just talk the realities of that. And that would probably say 6 weeks to the return to full services on this island because there was no problem in Survey. So there was never at any point where the whole country was in the dark because we very quickly then moved on to phasing, in different parts and also ensuring, especially around the town area, that the businesses and supplies side wouldn't be too. So what I'm saying is that we responded as best we could to the situation. Now, I don't know how well you understand what the issue was. So, I mean, what actually happened was that the first instance, our main electricity supply comes from Fianga, right? It comes towards Faleata, and then, so previously, you have the overhead supply, right? And then when it hits Faleata, they go underground. So instead of continuing the overhead supply together with the underground, it completely became underground. So when the first instance happened where the power went off was because the point where all the sourcing was underground became a problem when water affected it. Now, it's a technical problem, it's an operational problem, but then, it begged the question of if there had been an overhead supply, the situation would not have happened if it was just this one problem. So I understand that there were, what's the word, not malfunctions, but how that underground work was done obviously was defective because it caused then the blackouts. That was the first instance. Then the second instance essentially was the failing of a number of our supply, what you call them, engines, so all happening at the same time. So then it comes down to a question of maintenance, and it's operational, right? But it does raise the question that these are not things that just happen overnight. These are obviously accumulated issues, especially if it's a maintenance issue, right? So that was the situation. It was what it was, and we took advice of what was the best approach to ensure a return of service. But essentially, and especially with the transition from renewables, it makes the whole grid issue a lot more complex because you're then feeding different sources into the grid. And I think that's one area where perhaps our planning, because EPC is the sole provider of electricity, that planning perhaps has not been up, to a situation where we are addressing all those issues. If there was a policy issue, it was that the last government had essentially taken the position that they would outsource the development and distribution of electricity. And it became quite a volatile issue. And when we came into government, we essentially had to settle that issue and to bring back, the operations and distributions of electricity to Samoa, well, essentially to EPC, rather than to outsource it to a foreign entity. So I think from a policy perspective, that may have fed into perhaps breakdowns in, maintenance. People were unsure what was going to be happening. Maybe some vested interests were impacted. But at the end of the day, as any government, not just our government, you just deal with what happens the best way that you can, and I think we've done that.
Loa Fiama, what would you like to say to Samoan voters who might be watching this, about why they should choose you as their next Prime Minister? What?
Well, I think, this political thing has become, it's not just Samoa, it's internationally. So, somehow it all comes down to leaders. And yet we all know that governance is more than one person, right? And you're asking me the question, why should they pick me? So I think they should pick me because they've seen our operation. And despite the challenges that we've faced, and if you put aside the political hype, right, and you concentrate on key indicators of what we've been able to achieve, and I'm not saying we're perfect, there's so many more challenges that we need to address and which we would like to address going forward. But I think, we've proven in a relatively short period of time that, we're a responsible government. We're very much about the rule of law, which has been a contentious issue, not only with the HRPP, but with the other side of the FAST party. And it has to do with the issue of power. Because what I saw, and I was an HRPP member of parliament from 1985 until I resigned in 2020. What I saw was the stronger the party became, the more they went off the rails in terms of following, due process, the law, and so forth. And it's all that absolute power business. When you have the power, the mindset is we can do whatever we like. And that unfettered attitude, towards governance is something that I do not condone as a leader. I don't believe that it is a healthy base for any country. And I think, ultimately, when we're looking about the general welfare of people, then, the thing that assures us of that are our human rights under the law, and that there is fairness, right, for everyone. So I saw that with HRPP, and fundamentally, to the extent where they wanted to reach into the judiciary and the court system, and it was really at that point where I felt that as a legislator, and this government is founded, on a constitution and the rule of law, and I felt that if we undermined that sector, that critical pillar of government, then Samoa would be going down a very deep slide, if the political reach went into the courts. It happens everywhere. People do try. But I think, if we're wanting good governance and fair governance, we really do have to protect, especially our our rule of law, and the institutions of the law.
And with that, we wrap up this interview. Thank you so much, Honourable Prime Minister Fiame Naomi Mata'afa, for joining us on The Pacific.